we'll have a look at measuring unit cost. Again, this is something that your more mature customers would be looking to achieve, but again, it's a lot of business context to this, right? So what your customer is producing or manufacturing, what business they're in, right? The business context in terms of what their unit of measure is per customer, per transaction, or whatever is going to be very, very specific to them. What I've got in the demo environment, and we can share a copy if you wanted to upload it into the test environment here, is just something super generic where you can take the cost from a particular billing center. So you've isolated the cost of an application or a service or whatever it might be, and simply statically enter the number of transactions a month, the number of customers that were served a month, or whatever that might be. But of course, when we looked at our automation engine, we know that we can get that data from anywhere with an API, and that might be, an IBM Turbonomics or something, or an application performance monitoring solution that's got the kind of transaction counts. It might be a file somewhere, in an S3 bucket that's got a list of, customer transactions or whatever it might be. So for demo purposes, it's completely static and manual entry of this data, but we can ingest that, of course, from anywhere. So the one that I wrote is a cost per instance hour report. Put this out in the demo. And there's a policy. I can make this one available for you. I think it's being updated by the team. But this one is quite simple. We don't need any business KPIs. We don't need any business context here. You can run this for almost any customer. And what this is doing is just taking, for each billing center that you've created, and remember, we're going to create that hierarchy for customers, working out what the cost per of compute services. So this is focused specifically on instance cost, and looking at how many hours of compute were consumed. So remember, when we go into our tabular view, we can enable that usage metric, and we can see, compute hours, gigabytes stored in S3, API calls, and all of the other units that are measured in the bill data. So it's quite a simple policy that's just dividing one by the other, but also very insightful. And this is actually a mock in the demo environment, but this was run for one of our customers. So this is an actual scenario. It's been anonymized, right? But we ran this on a customer that we were onboarding, and in the main, of course, the things are going directionally in the right direction. But they did have a department, and in this particular case, it looks like it's actually an unallocated cost, is it here? But they had a department that's unit cost doubled over time, right? So the cost of compute here, and again, the numbers aren't quite the same, but the cost of compute doubled for one of their teams. So the services that they were providing were effectively twice as expensive per hour to run. And that was because of a change in RI strategy, right? So the teams that were deploying the workloads had modernized and gone to a new M5, or i5 series of compute, and they hadn't had the conversation about, well, what coverage do we have with reservations? So they suddenly went from running at a 50% discount on whatever they were running, migrated everything to newer instance types, and they're paying list. So the second one I wanted to show then was the kind of unit economics one. This is a demo policy that sits in the catalog, but this one was dead simple. I really just took the previous report, and you can isolate here a billing center. So we could go in here and type, I think I've got an engineering one in the demo data here. So you can select the billing center, or you could equally do this with rule-based dimensions as well. So you could, have a dimension of application, and then you could look for your application of payroll or web shop or whatever it might be. Isolate the cost, looking at it on an amortized basis, of course, because we want to see the cost, with reservations and everything else included. And then how far back do I you know, want to ignore that. That was from a forecast. How many you then put in the metrics that you've got for the period of time that you're running this for. So you would obviously do this from an API, but maybe there was 1,000 customers served in the first month, and then we did 1,500. It dropped down to 900, and then we had a spike of 3,000. Right. So those data points I'm entering manually purely for the demonstration purposes. Right. But you would get this from your customer from whatever source of data they have. As I said, when we integrate with Turbonomics, for example, they have transaction data when they're working with application performance monitoring tooling and other things. It would help if I pick the credentials, of course, from this. So that will run in the background. All that is doing is then looking at that billing center. So in this case, it's taking engineering. It's looking at the cost of all of those costs that we isolated. It would include shared costs. It could include labor costs and software licensing if we would push those into the platform. And we'll take that cost and simply divide it by the units of measure that we put in there. So it's really quite rudimentary, but also quite powerful. Let's see if it did actually generate an output. So ways the demo got right. So it produced a report. So for my engineering workloads, I can see, and I obviously only put a few values in, but my cost per transaction was up in the kind of somewhere between $4,000 and $14,000, depending on how many customer transactions I was processing over time. Now this is a brutal example. You would obviously be processing, you would have the actual numbers here, but it gives you an indication of how you can produce simple measures to indicate to your customers what that kind of unit cost is.